Hello and welcome to Two Balding Nerds. My name is Kellen,
And my name is George.
and today we're going to be giving you guys a review of the Book of Boba Fett in its entirety, what we felt about the show, and our opinions on how everything like that went.
So, Book of Boba Fett series review.
Yes.
So, yeah, overall, I think if you watch any of our other videos, yeah, I'd say we both liked the show, but it was definitely not without quite a few, I'd say, missteps that some of them really blatant and others have meh.
Meh is a good word, I think, to use to describe this show. I don't know what they were trying to achieve with this show. We've mentioned this a couple of times. As a Star Wars show, it was really good. As far as it being a story about Boba Fett, I think it failed to deliver, which
Yeah.
is honestly pretty disappointing. I had different expectations. It's not that I had high expectations for this, but when you call it the show the Book of Boba Fett, you're kind of led to believe that the show is going to be about Boba Fett. And I don't feel that the show really delivered on, I wouldn't call it a promise, but that implication that they were going to give us a story about his background and all that kind of stuff. They kind of did, but not really. It's kind of like the best analogy I can think of to describe it is like a child playing with his toys, and then a shiny new Mandalorian toy is placed in front of him, and he gets distracted and goes and plays with that instead. That's kind of what happened here.
Yeah, I like that analogy. I feel like the show had a identity crisis problem
Yeah.
where it was torn between trying to advance Boba Fett into more of a character that's traditionally what people would latch onto, like a growth story, but still not being able to quite give up the fact that, hey, people love Boba Fett for just being a silent badass in the background who got beaten in a really comically silly way, but still, like, it didn't seem to understand how to portray Boba Fett in a way that was good for all the fan base. Because in the Mandalorian, they showed him off as being a badass in those little snippets that they had him in, and that was perfect and that was great. And it felt like I feel like they thought they needed to add more depth and story to Boba Fett, and I'm going like, you didn't need to add much, but they changed him so much that it almost was like they could have put anyone under the armor and it would have been like, yeah, it's some dude dressed up as Boba Fett. It's not really Boba Fett. They could have done that as a plot twist, and I would have totally bought it with how many things they had changed about him.
Well, there's an expression for that. It's called bait and switch, right? A lot of retail stores they use it as a sales method. They will advertise something on sale for a really good price. They get you in the store, and oh, sorry about that, guys. We're actually out of stock. But while you're here, since you came all this way, why don't you look at this unit instead? And they try and sell you something different. That's kind of how it felt here. Like you mentioned in the season 2 of The Mandalorian, he comes in, he's really badass, he's just kicking ass, taking names, and that's kind of like the bait, right? They were like, hey, look, it's Boba Fett, the guy that you always wanted to watch, and he's really awesome, just like you always hoped he would be. Come watch this show. Our interest at that point was piqued, and then they're like, oh yeah, by the way, we're gonna make him really kind of laid back and just have other people tell him what he needs to do instead of him kind of taking charge and being the character we thought he was gonna be.
With that being said, because we both like the series, I kind of want to start on what did we like about the series? Because, like, overall, I can say seeing Boba when he was fighting and being a badass, I loved it. I loved, as much as I know critics did not like the last episode too much. I really liked the last episode because it was him just being mostly a badass, which I'm like, okay, that's what I wanted to see. Seeing him running around the raid core was great. Seeing Mando and Grogu going around doing their thing was great. Overall, the episode was exceedingly fun to watch. So that episode alone stood out to me for the Boba Fett aspect, but also I was surprised and thoroughly enjoyed seeing the episodes with Luke and Grogu. Once again, kind of missing the point of it being a Boba Fett TV show, but those were still scenes I thoroughly loved to see, and those were like definitely the highlights of the show for me. So I was curious what you thought was a highlight that you enjoyed.
Well, I'm actually kind of on the fence. I know you mentioned earlier that we both liked the show, and honestly, I don't know if I did like the show. I don't
Mm.
know if I'm just kind of buying into all the Kool-Aid that's, out there on the internet. Seems like the internet is suggesting a lot of kind of negative articles to me, and I've been reading a lot of them. And the more I read them, I'm like, this makes a lot of sense. Sometimes you read these negative articles and they're full of nitpicky stuff. And I've been watching some videos and reading some articles and breakdowns and all that kind of stuff. And the more that I kind of read these breakdowns and digest the information, I'm thinking, what really was the point of the show? Like we just discussed how there was almost like a bait and switch aspect. The story seemed kind of janky and all over the place, really distracted. I mean, anytime you take 30% of the show's runtime away from the main character and they're not in it, like him being out of 2 of the 7 episodes, doesn't make a lot of sense to me other than they're trying to hype up season 3 of The Mandalorian, which I get. But
Mhm.
I think we talked about this in one of the previous review episodes we did, how it seems like everybody's trying to do this interconnected universe thing, kind of like the MCU, because that seems to be the big thing. And I don't feel like that was necessary here. I miss the days when they could just tell a story from beginning to end without having to, have 50 cameos to sort of set up other properties or other TV shows that they're planning on doing, because it takes away from the overall narrative. And that's that's why we watch TV and why we watch movies. We want to be entertained. We want to have a really cool story told to us. And it's hard to tell a really good story when you're trying to shoehorn in the next cameo so that you can set up the next spin-off TV show rather than focusing on giving a good story from the beginning, middle, and end. Yeah, so I'm really not sure how I felt about this. From a story standpoint, I think it was kind of abysmal. From an entertainment standpoint, because like I said before, for Star Wars content, it was entertaining. And, it's hard to complain about that, but it's hard to get over the bait and switch. It's really one of those things where it almost feels like they lied to you and it kind of like shakes your trust a little bit. I don't know. Maybe I'm being dramatic, but I'm really hoping that in the future, rather than doing, individual shows, I know a lot of people have made the suggestion, why don't they do an anthology series where it's one encompassing series, and rather than having it focus on any one given character, it's like it's episodic. So one episode might follow a certain character, and then it jumps the next episode, it follows a different character, and it's like one overarching story.
Kind of like a game.
Yeah, yeah, kind of like Game of Thrones. That makes a lot of sense.
Mhm.
So I was thinking a good title for a show like that would be The Star Wars, which was George Lucas's original title until somebody told him to
Mhm.
drop the the.
Mhm.
So I thought The Star Wars is kind of like an homage to the original title
Mhm.
or Star Wars Chronicles.
Overall, I don't think you're being over dramatic. Like the reason why I mentioned saying the good things first was because unfortunately, I have a feeling that other than a few little points where we go, "Oh yeah, I like that scene," like when there was the robot in the, I believe it was the third episode, where he looked like General Grievous waving his blades around.
Yeah,
Little nuggets like that that we always enjoy seeing. But overall, yeah, the problem is like I would say I like this the show and the series, but I would never say like, oh, it's the best. Like I would say Mandalorian is one of the best of the Star Wars
yeah,
franchise. This one who had a character who could have easily been one of the best fell really short. So
yeah,
I'd say I liked it as in I liked it. I was happy to spend my 6, 7-ish hours of life to watch that.
yeah,
So, in that type of idea, now if you want to judge it critically, the points you just made were exceedingly valid. Like the fact we both mentioned when we were doing our episode review, it cannot be denied. The fact that you literally did not like not you just didn't have Boba Fett in a episode, a full episode, which was shocking. And then they followed it up with him only being in for maybe a minute. Like
yeah.
that is, as far as a show that is named after you, shocking.
It's mind blowing. It's like I said, that worked out to be almost 30% of the show entire runtime.
Mhm.
How does that get past one of the higher ups? How do they go, "Oh yeah, that's cool, like our main character just won't be in his own show for 30% of the show."
That's where I was saying earlier, where I feel like it was maybe there was too many cooks in the kitchen, or whatever the case may be, where they just didn't know how to exactly tackle Boba Fett for some reason. Because it doesn't make sense to me. Like the people who were behind this, I go most of them. I would say, like Favreau and all them. I go like, yeah, they're fantastic.
Yeah.
They know what they're doing. So something else seems a little bit off. And I feel like it was too many people were going like, okay, we gotta get Boba Fett right. And then too many people had their opinion on it and they kind of screwed it up because there's so many things in the show that were built that could have worked and I think did work. Like I think Sean was great from beginning to end. There was nothing about her I complained about. I was thrilled about her. When the Hutt showed up, that whole kind of standoff and the way they did that, great. The way that Cad Bane showed up, that was great. But somehow when they added all these different elements together, it became convoluted, it didn't work, and it was really frustrating when it's like, but there were so many good things about it, but majority of people, and I think as you were stating, because of the really glaringly wrong things in it, are focusing more on that than the parts that we go, "Hey, that part of the show was actually quite fun and good."
Well, it's almost one of those things where it sort of fell into almost fan servicey territory where
Mhm,
they were more focused on cameos and getting the fans riled up with Luke Skywalker coming back
mhm,
and Grogu and Cad Bane and
mhm,
Chrysanthemum and all that kind of stuff. It's like they were more worried about sticking in cameos than writing a good story, which I find bewildering considering that it was written by Dave Filoni and John Favreau,
mhm.
which they've had such a good track record leading up to that. So it's like, what happened? I watched this one video or it was an article, something. I heard it somewhere. So in this article, they mention that, the Huts come along and there's all these different plot points and plot threads that are introduced that are never followed up on, which is, at least in my opinion, it's like a huge storytelling sin. It's like opening the door and showing them like this wild party going on, and then shutting the door, and then you as if you're going, "Hey, hold on, what was that in there?" And they're like, "Oh, don't worry about that," and then they
Mm.
just ignore it, and you're like, "Well, that looked like there was a fun time in there. Why can't we go in there?" "Oh, we don't have time for that. Don't worry about it," and the same thing happened in the Eternals, and I think that's part of the reason why I was so frustrated watching the Eternals is because they had all these interesting plot points and plot threads that they kind of sowed the seeds for, and then they never watered those seeds. So you never got the payoff of those interesting things that they introduced you to. It's kind of like in Star Wars Episode 7, the super interesting concept of a stormtrooper defecting and possibly being force sensitive, and then they
Mhm.
never followed up on it.
Yeah.
It's like you had this super interesting concept and then you just ignored it. Don't tease me with stuff like that if you're not going to follow up on it.
Feel like with Star Wars, one of the problems they have too is like they're trying to avoid doing the big plot twist that everyone sees coming now because Star Wars, let's face it, had in its original trilogy two of the biggest like surprise moments was in Empire Strikes Back.
But those were actual good surprises. And I know what you're getting at with the whole.
I was gonna say it was an awkward surprise finding out Luke was Leia's sister. Not gonna lie. So
Well, I mean, there's there's that, but I know you're referring to Darth Vader being his father. But
Mhm,
that was like an interesting sort of story concept.
mhm.
Whereas like Ryan Johnson wanting to just, oh, well, they would never see this coming, so I'm trying to be controversial for the sake of being controversial or whatever,
Yeah.
and it's like that's not how a plot twist, a good one, works anyways. It's you can't just hammer it in there, and hope that it has the shocking effect that you want out of it. It's like it has to make sense.
The other one too, like, yeah, I feel bad pretty much. Like I think the points that we've made about specifically Boba Fett not being in 2 episodes was the biggest fumble of the whole
Yeah.
series. And then as you said, that kind of dangling the keys in front of you, going like, "Do you want the keys? Do you want the keys?" Nope, not giving you the keys. Where they
Yeah.
have bait and switch. That was also, I'd say, easily the number one, number two biggest flaws of the series. One of the things I also wanted to say, though, as a like of the series that I find gets overlooked quite a bit is the fact that the way that this one was shot was so much like an old traditional Western.
Yeah.
Like that scene between Cad Bane and Marshall was so good. And like some of my family members, we talked about it, of course, and they were saying like, "Hey, who's Cad Bane?" I had to be like, "Well, everyone, let me tell you who Cad Bane is," and explain to them Clone Wars because some of them, my family members, have not watched any of the animated stuff, so they haven't seen Clone Wars or the Bad Batch, and me being like, "See, this is why you have to watch it." God.
Yeah.
Like I had to explain that to them, and at the same time, one of my brothers-in-law, they mentioned that they were like, "Yeah, so he's big into Western movies," and he was talking to me about like how that was shot so much like an old spaghetti western, and me being not a huge fan of westerns, I could think a couple I've seen where I was like, yeah, it kind of looked familiar, but then he said, no, this is fairly similar, and I like the fact because George Lucas took a lot of inspiration from old westerns and samurai movies. So the fact that they really leaned on that old western style feel for this one made me extremely happy to see that type of cinematography and everything. And that's something I could see critics and them giving a higher score for the film, but something that the average kind of Star Wars fan, I wouldn't even say the average Star Wars fan, I'd say a lot of Star Wars fans would pick up on that and like that scene. But once again, it doesn't compensate for the bigger glaring problems of it. And it just makes me so upset to have to say, yeah, these parts are good, but the problems are still so much of a problem that we can't say this was great. This was a fantastic series.
Yeah, it was quite far away from that. I was just thinking about it right now, and the best thing I can kind of compare this to is like a Transformers movie.
Oh
This
no,
story,
no.
this story is just god awful, but there's explosions and there's fan service and there's this and there's that, and oh, look at the pretty colors, you guys. All right, tune in for season 2, you bunch of schmucks. We're gonna, steal your money, and I don't know.
Ugh, that's painful.
Yeah, I mean that's a pretty damning comparison, but I will agree with you, the whole Western thing. I really enjoyed that. I was sitting on the edge of my seat, even though I already knew what was going to happen. You
Mhm.
know, I think we talked about it in the, what was it, the episode 6 review. I think we talked about this, but I said it was like basically a copy and paste from every Western movie where the badass, you know, outlaw rolls into town, and the sheriff challenges him to a duel in the city street, the square or whatever, and the stupid deputy runs his mouth and tries drawing first and ends up getting shot. It
Mhm.
was like directly cut and paste from that. So I knew that was going to happen, but I still enjoyed it.
As much as I feel like I've been generous in saying how much I did like the show in general. Once again, I thought it was a decent use of my time. I'm not giving it any accolades for how it was. And I'm also definitely saying at this point, I would kind of groan and roll my eyes at a season two.
Yeah, it's one of those things. I think I mentioned this before. I don't think season 1 did enough to deserve a season 2. That being said, in knowing how the Hollywood culture is, it's going to probably end up getting a season 2, whether it deserves it or not, because let's face it, it's Star Wars, and
Hmm.
Star Wars is a moneymaker. So I feel like it's gonna get a season 2. However, in my opinion, I would say they are away from Robert Rodriguez. I think his direction tanked the show. You look at somebody like Bryce Dallas Howard, who directed Episode 5, Return of Mando, and that was easily, by far, no questions asked about it. That was the best episode of the season, and it wasn't even about Boba Fett.
He was not in it.
Yeah, and I mean, she's directed a couple of episodes of The Mandalorian, and the
Mhm.
episodes that she's directed personally have
Yeah.
been fantastic. So,
No, she's literally everything she's touched has been perfect so far, and easily I agree. She needs to be given more control and more at the helm of things. I
yeah.
could not agree more with how well she's been doing.
Yeah, I was talking to a friend of mine, and I was not aware of this because I'm not into Spy Kids or whatever like that, but Robert Rodriguez was the one that directed Spy Kids.
Yes, that's right. He did.
Which is why there's been a little bit of influence with the scooter, speeder things, and
Hmm.
all those kind of things. I think that was kind of his idea to implement that in there. And I get it. There was the whole, scooter culture way back when, and all that kind of stuff. And I just like, we discussed it before. It did not feel like it fit. The whole modern culture kind of thing did not seem to fit in the Star Wars kind of mythos. And I think that was another Robert Rodriguez kind of suggestion, or idea to put that in there.
I actually don't think the modder part of it didn't fit. I think that's totally within the world of Star Wars.
Can I clarify?
Sure.
I don't mean like the idea of having cybernetic implants or modifications, but like the way it was portrayed was like going to the tattoo parlor. Oh, I just feel like getting, a cybernetic hand, whether I need it or not. That sort of idea I don't feel like fits into Star Wars, but rather, the idea of, oh, My hand got chopped off by a lightsaber. I need a new hand. So you go and you get a cybernetic implant, sort of like a medical procedure. This is not sort of a medical procedure. It's like going to some dirty, dank back room and getting like a dirty tattoo done, kind of thing. That's how it felt, and I don't feel like that belongs in Star Wars.
Overall, I would say I think actually that type of style I could see definitely being in Star Wars, and I don't have an issue with it being in Star Wars. My issue with it is I think just like with them in general, is I go the super bright shiny colors of them, that does not belong in Star Wars, especially on a planet like Tatooine. If
Yeah,
you had it on like
Naboo or Coruscant,
yeah, like Naboo, Coruscant, some of the other lore like Nar Shaddaa and
one of the inner rim planets.
yeah, one of those planets that have like the really big skyscrapers and are well developed and stuff like that. Or even like Nalhata, I could see that being too, but more of a necessity based
Yeah,
thing, not as just a cosmetic thing. So, like the fact that they were in there and they were so like super brightly colored scooters and all that jazz, and especially because if they were like even let's say like a bunch of spoiled rich kids who were like they had nothing better to do, and then they were all bright and shiny and everything, I could have bought that more because then I'd be like, okay, they have the money to afford to make their stuff look so shiny and perfect. But when they were literally like, yeah, we're starving, we have no water, I'm like, then how the hell do you have a bike that looks so pristine? Like, I can't
yeah.
even keep my car that clean when I wax it. And you're living on a planet that literally has sand blowing everywhere all the time. That was major misstep at that point, in my opinion, just because it looked so off with the rest of the Star Wars and everything on Tatooine. And it really irritated me. I like seeing them zip around and stuff, and the kind of like the thought they had for them being there, I thought was fine, but their whole execution was crummy.
Honestly, if there is a season two, which, like I mentioned before, I expect that there probably will be, I really hope that they learn from, some of the critiques that fans have had, because it's like we're not the only ones critiquing the story and stuff like that. That seems to be a pretty universal complaint from a lot of people, is that the story was either janky or non-existent. So I'm really hoping the second time around we get more story and less distractions and less ham-fisted cameos and that kind of thing. Like I said, ultimately that's what we want out of any form of entertainment, is you want a good story. Action can only carry so far. You can't rely on action, and some people are perfectly fine with that, and that's great for them that they're pretty easy to please. But I think it's okay to have expectations. Without expectations, you're going to get crap, and that's not acceptable, especially in Star Wars.
Yeah, it's one of those fine lines to walk because it's like Star Wars to me is so precious and so important in my life. So I really want to see it do well. And at the same time, for someone who's looking on the outside who's not super into Star Wars, it is a bunch of people with space wizards and giant walking carpets going around going pew pew, and it's supposed to be for kids. So it's a really interesting kind of situation the people at Disney have to hit the nail on the head for, because it's like, yeah, Star Wars really doesn't, if you look at it on paper, really should not have become the cultural icon it is. But I'm thrilled at that it is, and it has to be treated as the cultural icon it is now. So you can't just kind of go, whatever, we'll just do whatever because it's for kids and it's fun. It's like, no, people like they deeply find some of the stuff in Star Wars now to the point of being sacred.
Yeah.
And on another note, just in general, I would really like if Disney could make a show that Ming Na Wen is in, the show itself is good, because every show she's in, she's one of the highlights of the show, and it just keeps on being a show that kind of falls on its face, and I feel so sorry for her.
Well, we said that or I don't know if we said that, but I know I personally brought that up where I said, she did really well in the show, and I'm liking her character the more I see her character, and I'm at the point where I'd be like, oh, give us a Fennec Shan spin-off and I'll watch that, because her character has, good instincts, and she's the type of character where she's like, I don't give a shit. This is what needs to get done, and she goes and she does it. And it's like,
Mhm.
I like that. I respect that. I don't like any of this dicking around and hemming and hawing about what to do. She's decisive, and that's a quality that I appreciate. So, you know what? Give me a Fennec Shan show, and I'll watch it.
She's decisive and strong, and it's a very likable trait to see a character so who knows what they're doing, and overall, just seeing that strength, I quite enjoy on screen.
One thing I want to say about this show, the best way I think I can sum it up, I had a conversation with a friend of mine the other day, and I told him, I said, oh, my buddy and I were going to be doing a full series review on the show. And he said, oh, really? And I said, yeah. And he said, I haven't watched the show yet. How was it? And I said to him, I said, you know what? I said, from kind of a diehard fan's perspective, I said, I think a lot of people found it a bit disappointing for one reason or another. But I said, from a casual fan's point of view, I said, I feel like they're going to enjoy it because I said, as far as Star Wars material goes, it was entertaining. So I said, I think this one was kind of more for the casual fans rather than the diehard fans. But that is my opinion from a certain point of view.
I actually would slightly say if you're a casual fan, this would actually, I think, throw you off even more.
You think so?
Yeah, because let's say you didn't watch Mandalorian because you go, I don't know what a Mandalorian is, but I do know what Boba Fett is. How utterly lost and confused will you be if you watch the book of Boba Fett and then you're like, who the hell is this guy? What the hell is the dark saber? What the hell is what child is he talking about? Why is there a little Yoda? Like if you jumped onto Boba Fett because you know Boba Fett from the originals, but you didn't for some reason watch the Mandalorian, you're completely and utterly lost in the show, especially when those two episodes show up.
Well, I think maybe from my point of view, my idea of a casual fan is somebody that watches Star Wars but doesn't like hasn't watched like maybe the Clone Wars all the way through, or
Mhm.
hasn't watched this or that, but knows enough about Star Wars to have an idea of what's going on and isn't like completely lost watching this sort of material.
Yeah.
Whereas like us diehard fans that have like watched the Clone Wars, have watched Rebels, have watched all this, so we have all the background information and we don't need anything explained to us, you
Mhm.
know?
I guess it's also thinking about it because I have some family members who are Star Wars fans,
Yeah.
and they haven't watched, any of the animated, as I mentioned, and some of them have actually not even watched any of the live stuff yet, but they were like, "Oh, yeah, I know who Boba Fett is, I'd watch that." And I'm like,
Yeah, those are the
"Yeesh."
filthy casuals.
So, overall, with that being said, I'd say can give it kind of 2 ratings.
Yeah.
I would say if I was to rate the show as like, oh, from 1 to 10, 1 being terrible, 10 being outstanding, I'd say the show, if you're a more casual fan and not like a really hardcore Star Wars fan, but you at least know what the hell Star Wars is, of course,
Yeah.
I could say you could give it as high as a 7 out of 10.
I would think that you could probably even give it somewhere between a 7 and an 8 from a casual standpoint. I think that's a
Okay.
pretty fair rating for this show.
I'd say 7, but if you're like a hardcore fan and you were expecting, once again, the emphasis on it being a Boba Fett series, I'd give it more of a 6
Yeah.
because once again, there's all these really good things that are in there. There's lots of little nuggets of things that were great fun to watch and go, oh, I like this scene. Oh, I like this part. I like that part. But when push comes to shove, the part I feel like we focused on quite a bit is the main meat of the series had a major problem with. We didn't have Boba Fett in 2 of our 7 episodes, and there were some times where the show just dragged on horribly, and then it all of a sudden picked up and was super exciting, and just the pacing of it and some of the choices they made to jump to Mando and everything really was not good for Boba Fett, and it feels like Boba Fett himself did not get the good credit and shake it the stick that he deserved.
Yeah, it was almost a little bit of a slap in the face. Like I said, I think in the first or second episode when I was complaining about the runtime of the episodes, and I think I said specifically, there is enough story material here to be told that the episode should be 45 plus minutes long, and there's no excuse for why they should be shorter than that.
Mhm.
And we didn't get any of that story that I believe is there. So for me, that was rather frustrating that, like I said, I was going into this expecting, some wild tale to be told, and we didn't get that. So I think for me, if I had to rate the show out of 10, I would give it somewhere between a 5 and a 6. There was
Mhm.
definitely enough redeeming things about the show that it doesn't feel like it was time wasted, but it was
Mhm.
definitely disappointing. And it was definitely one of those things where you sort of felt like you were promised one thing and given another, which you
Yeah.
should never have to endure when it comes to your favorite shows. If you're gonna call a show the Book of Boba Fett, like, you should literally be important in every one of the episodes of the show, especially if it's 7 episodes. If it's as that condensed, there should be
Mhm.
no reason why he's out of it for 2 episodes. I could understand if, like back in the day when we had 16 episode seasons, if he was out from a couple, there's like a mini arc in a season
Mhm.
that long. Okay, that's
Yep.
fine,
Yep.
But when it's 7 episodes, you can't have your main character be out of it for almost 30% of the entire show. That doesn't make sense.
I also kind of wonder if the show did seem not as good in comparison because of once again how much, especially Mandalorian season 2 nailed it out of the park.
I know it's been talked about that one of the reasons why they went kind of a different direction with Boba's character was because, oh well, we can't have two badass bounty hunters that wear Mandalorian outfits because that's boring. One of them, they have to
Mm.
be distinguishable from the other. But I'm like, Boba was kind of here first, and I mean, Mando's awesome in his own right, but Mando has a character arc going on where he was the lone gunslinger and now he's basically a surrogate dad to a little green toad that likes eating other frogs. He's got his own story arc going on. Let him be the hero character and let Boba continue to be the badass, cold hearted murderer that shoots people for looking at him wrong. That's
Yep.
what we want out of Boba Fett. And if we
Yep.
get a little bit of that out of Mando, and at the same time he's a good dad, then I'm totally stoked on that too.
With that being said, I'm interested to know what our viewers are thinking too on this because, like, yeah, there's so many different opinions. I'd say I'd love to hear when it comes to the book of Boba Fett. So please put your comments in the comment section down below, and definitely please like the channel if you enjoyed what we had to say. We'll be more than happy to do more episodes and seasons reviews of what comes next from the House of Mouse.
Until next time, folks.